Hi, I'm Miss Becky from the Montgomery County Norristown Public Library. And if you walk into the library at the times we're open now, you will see me looking like this with a mask over my face. And you probably see a lot of people walking around with masks on their face when they're out in the store and walking down the street sometimes, because we are in the midst of a pandemic right now. So I am going to teach you how to sew your own mask out of an old t-shirt. Now there's plenty of videos out there about making your own video without sewing, but because this is a sewing class, I'm going to show you how to sew one. And it's not too hard, and you can do it with a sewing machine or hand sewing, and I'm going to show you both. And then you'll have a mask that you can wear, and you can wash it and use it over again, and you can make more masks for yourself or for your family members. And the only cost to you is the t-shirt, which is probably old and falling apart anyway, or else you wouldn't be cutting it up today. So I'm going to show you everything that you need to be able to make this mask. Okay, so you're going to need t-shirt, hopefully a one slightly bigger than what you wear, because you need the length for the ties that go around. You're going to need some scrap paper, just some old recycled paper from some junk mail or old homework or something like that. That's to make our pattern. You'll need a ruler and pen or pencil. You'll need a pair of sharp scissors. You'll need, if you're going to hand sew this, you'll need a needle and thread. Needle and thread. That's a big spool of thread. Straight pins are very handy. I have my pin tomato there to help me. You may need some tape or something to put your scrap paper together with if you need a slightly larger pattern than what your paper will give you. And if you're going to be machine sewing, of course you need a sewing machine threaded with thread that will match your t-shirt. We're going to start by making the pattern. And this is how I measured the pattern. If you look at your hand, you have the tip of your finger and the heel of your hand. Did you know your hand had a heel? Well, it's right there. And if you put the end of your middle finger in the middle of your nose and put your hand under your chin, about where your heel of the hand is, that would probably be long enough to cover your face for the width of your mask. So we're going to take this and I'm going to measure from there to the heel of my hand on my face. I have short fingers. It's about 6 inches. So that's going to be the width. So I'm going to write 6 inches down here. That's going to be the width of my mask. Now to get the length, or how long the sides are going to be, put the heel of your hand close to the middle of your nose as you can, or your mouth, whatever is easier for you. And then where your fingers end should be right at the edge of your ear. So that's going to be half of the length of your mask, half of the length, because you need both sides covered, right? So if, like I just measured here, was 6 inches, so if this much is 6 inches, I want to add another 6 inches or multiply by 2, because you need 2 parts. And 6 plus 6, or 2 times 6, is math, 12, right? So we want a 6-inch by 12-inch rectangle. So I have my scrap paper here. And if you have a regular letter size piece of paper, it's 11 inches. My length measurement was 12 inches. However, because this is made of t-shirt material, it is stretchy, and because the important part of the mask is the part that covers all of your mouth and all of your nostrils, whatever breathes out of you, the sides, how long they aren't really that important. So I'm not going to mess around with adding another inch onto the edge of my paper. If you have a longer face, a wider face, and you do need that extra room, you can just tape another piece of paper onto the end there. But I'm just going to leave it at 11. We're going to see what happens, because the mask that I was wearing when I started this actually went over my ears, even though I measured it at 12 inches. So I'm going to leave it at 11. So this is going to be my length. And then I'm going to measure up 6 inches from the bottom, make a mark, 6 inches, make a mark, 6 inches, make a mark. And I'm going to connect all of those marks. Connect all of those marks. And there I've got my rectangle. Get my scissors and cut off the excess. Of course, if your face is not 11 inches wide, if it's shorter, you would just measure, you know, say if it were 10, you would just measure over 10 from the edge, mark, 10 from the edge, mark, 10, mark, connect those marks like I just did, blah, and then cut that part off. So there, I've got my pattern, my template, my rectangle to start. So I'm going to use a t-shirt that I've already used for something else. You will probably have a whole t-shirt, or maybe not. If you've made other t-shirt projects with me, you may have parts left over, and you can definitely use that. Use up whatever you can. Fabric, if you buy it in the store, is expensive unless you find sales and coupons. So anytime you can find something at home that you can convert to a sewing pattern is great. Okay, now I have this t-shirt and it's got a design on it, a decal. Now you can choose to leave that on the outside, or when you go to sew it together, you can flip this part over and put that in the middle, so nobody will see it. I'm going to try, see how this goes. I'm going to try to put that design in the middle. And if you want it right in the middle of your face, find your center. I just folded my paper in half and then center it over. I'm right at the edge. Move this. Right at the edge of my sleeve, but that'll be okay. So there's my design. If I want to kind of, oh, and it's okay now. Okay, so there are two, oh, now we got the neck in the way, so we have to shift it down. You have to just kind of adjust things and make sure everything's flat. There are no wrinkles or anything underneath. Okay. Now there are two ways you can do this. You can either take your pins and pin around, pin the pattern down. And if you have pins, I would recommend you do this instead of the other way, because this way it won't shift while you're cutting. It'll keep everything in place. And you'll have a more accurate piece of fabric when you're done. So you can do it this way. The pin will go in. Okay. You can do it this way and cut around, or you can take your pen or pencil. I would recommend a pen and trace around all the way around. Okay. Just, if you don't have pins, make sure you hold your template in place that it doesn't move. And the t-shirt wants to kind of bunch up as I'm drawing, but just sort of plow through this. Since it's t-shirt material, it's stretchy, it's forgiving, you're not really going to notice any little inconsistencies too much. So I'm just going to cut around since I've already pinned it down. And this is where really good sharp scissors are a must. Now you can see here, if I took that off, I'd have the rectangle traced on my fabric. But I'm just going to keep cutting around here. Sharp scissors. If you're serious about sewing, you should get yourself a pair of scissors that you only use for fabric, because paper will make your scissors blades dull. So you don't want to use, if you can help it, you don't want to use the same scissors for cutting paper as you do for cutting fabric. And you can go to Walmart, or even the dollar store sometimes has decent scissors that you can find. Or you can go to the fabric store and actually get a real fabric scissors that are made specifically for cutting fabric. Okay, I'm taking my pins out, sticking them back in my tomato. Oh, and make sure you're doing 2 pieces of fabric. I'm sorry, I didn't say that before. You want the front and the back of the t-shirt, because you want 2 layers. The more layers you have, the safer you are, the less possibility of inhaling coronavirus, virus molecules, whatever. So we're doing 2 layers. So now we've got the main part, and the other part of this is the ties, and I don't have the bottom half of this t-shirt, but I have this t-shirt that I cut up for something else. And you notice that there is a sewn hem on the bottom to make a finished edge on the t-shirt. So we're going to cut this close to the stitching. Don't cut the stitching, but where's my scissors? Cut it close to the stitching. It's okay if you go over even 1/4 of an inch. We want to make sure we have plenty of room so we can sew this to the main part of the mask. Whoop, get close there. I don't want to get too close. And it might be easier if you just lay it down like this and cut like this. It goes faster. Make sure you're using a surface that won't get scratched. You noticed I put this cutting mat down so that I'm protecting my table and my tablecloth, because I don't want to scratch everything up and mess everything up. So if you even have like a piece of floor vinyl, like a leftover square from some project your parents did, or I don't know, big board, even a cutting board that you use for cooking, you could use the cutting board as your surface. A clean one, of course. Okay, so we're going to take this, and I'm going to fold it in half, match up the ends here, and cut that in half. Now, you have the choice of either making loops that go around your ears, or ties that go around your head and tie in the back. I personally like the ties that go around my head, because the ears get sore sometimes from behind. So I'm going to use the sleeve, which I experimented with some permanent ink on this one just to see how it would react. And I'm just going to cut this out so I have extra just in case these aren't long enough. I can add more to it. So I'm just going to cut this out too. just in case I need it. I think I cut the other sleeve off of this, right? I have two. I save everything. Someday my family is going to need to go through all this stuff and say, why did she keep all this stuff? But this is why, because then I can go back and use things. Okay, so now we've got two ties. Now we've got two ties, plus some extra if we need to add to it. And I'm just going to clip those because we don't need the seam part there. Okay, so we have a little extra we can add to if we find we want it or need it. Okay, so now we have our two pieces and we're going to sew them together. So we want to put the right sides of the fabric together. So if we want the design facing out, we want it up, the first piece facing up. The second piece, we want the good side, the right side on top, so that the right sides are inside and the wrong sides are outside, because we always sew on the wrong side most of the time. And if you can't tell the difference between the right side and wrong side, sometimes it's hard to tell with t-shirt. It's easier, I think, to see it on here. But if you notice the right side sort of, do I have the, I can't even tell. Okay, this is the right side. And the right side has, kind of looks striped. If you look really close at the weave, it looks, there's kind of lines there. And if you flip it over, you don't see the lines. You just see kind of nubbly, little bumply stitches. You see the lines a little bit, but they're more pronounced on this side. So if you care that much about making sure you have the right sides and are out, that's what you look for, is the lines are on the right side. So I want to put my design here. If you don't want the design to show, just flip it over so the wrong side is the right side. Now, you may be totally confused by now. Don't worry. It's not a big deal. Nobody's even going to tell. And actually, this other one that I made, the green one, I did put the design inside. So this is the wrong side out here. And you can't hardly even tell unless you look really close. So we've got our two pieces together. Now, if you're hand sewing, you may want to mark your seam line, because then you'll sew a straight stitch. When you have a sewing machine, you have guides to help you. So we're going to make a 1/2 inch seam. So the 1/2 inch, this is the inch, the one. We want the big line in between the edge of the ruler and the one. You want that line there as 1/2 inch. So we're going to measure up and make a mark, just like we did for the template. Measure up 1/2 inch, make a mark, 1/2 inch, make a mark, and connect the marks. That one's a little crookedy, but that's okay. Nobody's gonna know a thing. Okay, and again, it's sort of bunchy. You just kind of roll over it as well as you can. I'm going to do the same thing up here. Look at that. That kind of went up a little bit. I'm just going to double check how wide that is. Yeah, I'm just going to trim that off because I'm not sure how that happened, but it's too high. Now I probably made it too short. Oh well. Nobody's going to really know once you get it all together. But there's half, and half. connect the dots. Da, da, da. Oh, that one goes up a little bit. If one dot is a little out of line, just kind of ignore it. We can trim it off later and make it even. Just make sure everything is okay. And if you want, put a couple pins in here just to make sure nothing moves while you're sewing. Just be careful while you're sewing that you don't poke yourself, and you take them out when you get to the part that's pinned. Okay, so we're going to do the hand sewing first. If you're doing machine sewing, you can fast forward through this part or stay tuned and learn how to hand sew, just because it's never a bad thing to know how to do. If you can make your own clothes or fix your own clothes when they get damaged, you are so much more talented than a lot of other people in the world. So for the second mask that I'm going to machine sew, I don't have any more hem edge to cut because I'm using part of a t-shirt. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting 2-inch strips from what's left of the t-shirt to make my ties. And you can do how I showed you. If I can find my pen, you can measure, oh, it's under there. Can't hear you. You can measure up 2 inches and mark, and up 2 inches and mark, and up 2 inches and mark. Do that all the way across. I'm going to show you this handy dandy tool that I have, and like connect those dots just like before. I'm going to show you this handy dandy tool that I have. It's a little bit expensive, but it's a good investment if you plan to keep sewing. And this is a cutting mat. This blue thing here is a cutting mat. And then this is a transparent ruler. And I can just lay it down on the fabric, find my 2 inches down. And then I have this thing that looks like a pizza cutter. And this just cuts the fabric right at the line. Ta-da! And there's my 2-inch piece. Now, this is definitely an investment, this set. They cost pretty much. A big one like this is pretty expensive. You can get smaller ones. You can get smaller rulers. But, you know, if you're really serious about it and you want to keep sewing and you want to make it a lot easier for you and a lot less time consuming, especially if you're cutting squares or rectangles or whatever for quilts, if you get into quilting, this is a good set to have. And you're going to spend over $100 probably for the whole set. But if you watch Joann's sales, that is the store that generally has the most sewing material that you can find. They have coupons. If you sign up for their coupons, you can get like 50% off something, or watch for sales where they're half price or whatever. And you can get these things for a lot less than they would cost at full price. So I just wanted to show that to you, just in case you're interested in getting a little more hardcore with your sewing. How I measure how much thread I'm going to use, I find the end and I pinch it and put it up to my nose, and then I stretch my arm out. Oh, there goes my thread. And so it's about as far as my arm will reach there. And then I take that thread that I just did, there it is, and it's hard to see, and then I just double it. So I do that much again. My thread's on the floor, but that's okay. I'll grab it later. And then cut it off. Okay, so now that cut end of your thread, what did I do with my needle? So now we're going to thread the needle, find the end, of your thread, wherever it may be. Okay, check. This one's a little fuzzy. This is not the end I just cut. So I'm going to cut that off. You want to make sure you have a nice, crisp, flat end of your thread. And then you're going to find the eye, the little hole in the end of your needle. And you're going to put your thread through the eye. And sometimes this takes a little practice. If you have a really tiny hole in your needle, you might have to work at it a little bit harder. So I have my two ends. I match them together as closely as I can. I'm just going to smooth the thread all the way down to the needle to make sure everything is even. Try not to tangle it up too much because you get knots when you tangle, and that's not fun. Okay, so now we're going to knot the end. So when we sew, it doesn't come through. You're going to wrap it around your finger. You're going to pinch the end and then cross it over. Where it meets, you're going to pinch it, and you're going to roll the thread off your finger, and you're going to pull and kind of pinch till you get a knot at the end. Okay, smooth your thread all the way down, make sure it's even, and there's my knot. You always want to keep your knot inside your work so that nobody can see it because it's ugly. Okay, so now we're going to start sewing. Okay, so we're going to start, and bear with me if you've sewn before, we're going to come up from underneath. So we're always going to keep our work on top. Now this, the edges got a little uneven, so I'm just going to start. You always start a little bit back from the edge because the edge can sometimes be unstable, unravel, and then you lose your stitches. So my first stitch comes up from the bottom. Now we're going to do a back stitch. So instead of, you may think of sewing as down and up and down and up. I'm going to show you the back stitch, which is instead of taking a stitch forward, we're going to take a stitch back behind the thread, right there, like that. Then we're going to come up from underneath, tilt your fabric, tilt your needle. Remember where your stitch line is, and you're going to come up the same distance away. See how far this is from here. Then you're going to do that same distance from here to the end of the needle. So your stitches are going to be even if you do that. So just keep pulling. Oop, keep your little corners out of the way. And pull it snug, but not too tight because you don't want your stitches to bunch up. Okay, so now we're going to do that again. We're going to go back to the end of where the last stitch was. And then we're going to go forward ahead of where the thread is. Okay, so we're going to pull that all the way through. Pull it snug but not too tight. And we're going to keep doing that all the way across. Do it again. You go back to the last stitch and ahead of thread. And keep your work out of the way. Okay, so now when you look at the back, you have a solid line. And if you do it right on the front, you'll have a solid line. So that just makes an extra strong stitch for whenever you're sewing pieces together. And this is a good stitch to know if you have a seam on your clothing that came apart and you need to put it back together. This is a good strong sewing stitch to use to do that. Okay, now I got a little loop there because my threads are slightly uneven, so I'm just going to kind of smooth them out again to the end to the needle. Just try to get them together. Sometimes that happens, they get a little uneven and you just have to keep going back and fixing it. Okay, so we're going to keep sewing across like this. Oh, there it's doing it again. Why do you keep doing it? And you want to not have your thread too long. Oh, the one thing I forgot to do before we started sewing is to make sure that we have the right length for our piece. So I'm going to stop what I'm doing right now. I'm just going to tuck this in here for a minute, and we're going to check the width or the length. Well, everything. Okay, so what I should have done before I started was to make sure that this is the right length around my face. And it's ending just over my ears, and I really don't want that. It's really not comfortable to have the mask over, the edge of the mask over your ear. So I'm gonna, that's about where I want it to start, and then end about there. So I'm gonna see, it's about, I would say 2 inches. Yeah, it's about 2 inches too long. So I'm going to cut 2 inches off the end before we get over there. Just make sure that your, if you're using a design, that is still showing that you're not cutting off the design. Okay, so about 2 inches there. I'm just going to make 2 marks. Make this real quick. And just those 2 inches off right there. Doesn't have to be exact. So now that should fit better over my face. So we'll return now to our regularly scheduled stitching. And I'll keep sewing. You recall, go back to the last stitch, go ahead of the thread. Keep doing this all the way across. You can listen to music while you're doing this. You can, if you can multitask, you can listen to teachers' lecture, reading, whatever, have a parent read a story to you while you're doing this, whatever. Helps pass the time. Can do this at night while you're watching TV. Something to do with your hands while you're listening to something else. That's what I like to do. My husband's watching TV, and we can get rid of this pin. My husband's watching TV, and I don't really care about what he's watching, which is 99.9% of the time. I will be doing either some hand sewing or reading a book. Both very worthwhile pastimes as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing this all the way across. You can see how we finish the end. Okay, now I've gotten this far, and I probably don't have enough thread to finish all the way to the end. So I'm going to tie this off. So I'm going to take one more stitch. I'm going to come back up where the thread came out. And just make like a loop. Don't pull it tight. You're going to bring your needle through the loop and now pull it tight. So now you've got a knot. And we're going to do that again. We're going to make a little stitch down below that knot. Make your loop. Bring your needle through and pull it tight. And then I'm going to take one more little stitch just so I have some tail there so it doesn't come apart. And I'm going to clip it off. Okay, so now I'm going to rethread some new thread and rethread my needle. And there it is. You can see it. It's right there. Don't lose it. I'm going to measure out what I need, the arm's length, and then another arm's length to be doubled. Cut it off. Get off of there. There. Thread my needle right in there. Bring my two ends together. And this is why you don't want more than an arm's length of thread, because You need to be able to reach from one end to the other. I'm going to wrap it around my finger, pinch it, and roll it off. Oop, didn't work. Sometimes if your fingers are too dry, you need to dampen them a little bit. A lot of times I'll just lick my fingers, but if you don't want to be germy, you can dip it in a little bit of water. Or if I'm at work doing this kind of stuff, I'll use a little bit of hand sanitizer. Just anything to give your fingers a grip. Okay, got my knot. And I'm just going to pick up where I left off. I'm going to start a stitch ahead of where I left off. See that? Come up from the bottom. Bring your knot up till it's snug. And then we're just going to keep sewing across to the end. Chances are that I'll have to do this on the other side as well. Cross that bridge when we come to it. So I'll keep sewing till we get to the end here. Down at the stitch and up past the thread. Stitch and up past the thread. When you start doing this enough, it gets easier. You may think it's hard to start, but it's just like everything else, you just have to keep practicing until you get it. And really, it's a good skill to have. You never know when you might need it to fix something. And if your grown-ups in your house don't sew, and you do, you can be sewing on all their loose buttons and fixing all their holes and ripped seams and be the hero of the day. Oops, I got it. Oop. I'm going to smooth my threads again to the end. Almost to the end there. I think I'll do one more stitch. Maybe one more. Okay, so we're going to go down. I'm going to come up around the edge and just catch those two edges. Just see how the thread, I took the needle down and out the bottom. So I'm coming around the edge just to kind of secure that. Now I'm going to take a stitch there at the edge, pull it almost tight, keep a loop there, bring your needle up through it, pull it tight. Do it again, another stitch, down through, pull it up, put your needle through the loop, pull it tight. And I'm just going to take another stitch there and just pull it tight. Make sure all my threads are tight there. And then I'm going to clip that off. Okay, so we have one side stitched. We're just going to do that with the other end. And I'll meet you back when it's done. I would like to show you something that happened on the back here that you may not notice as you're sewing the top. You notice my two fabrics are not even on the edge. And that was my fault for not checking when I was pinning to make sure that all the edges were even. But if this happens to you and you've already started sewing, notice that I'm just making sure that I'm not sewing off the edge there, that I'm giving myself some room on this side so that I'm still sewing this edge down. So I'm just going to keep sewing along there and just being mindful that the edges aren't even. Once we're finished and we turn our stitches to the inside, no one's ever going to know, but just be aware of what's going on underneath as you're sewing. I'm going to keep going until I get to the end. Okay, we're up to the end again. And if you notice, we're uneven here a little bit too. So we're going to just be careful when we take this last stitch, when we come up from underneath, I'm going to try to stay within that edge. Okay, that's going to be our last stitch. We're going to make another right there on the edge. And I just tangled everything up, didn't I? Sometimes this happens and you just sort of have to kind of pull your threads back till you get everything untangled. Okay, my threads got very uneven here somehow. Okay, so now we're going to come down to our loop, bring our thread through, pull it tight, make another stitch close by, pull it down to a loop, bring your needle through, pull it tight, and another stitch, pull it all the way through, and clip it off. Voila. Okay, now I think I want to trim that little extra edge off. Just if you do that, just be very careful that you don't cut your stitches. So I stitch pretty close over here. So if you're going to use a sewing machine, this is what you need to do. Now, we need to find a 1/2 inch. We're going to make a 1/2 inch seam, so we need to find the mark where it's a 1/2 inch. And on the plate at the bottom of your sewing machine, you should have some marks there with numbers. And those are fractions. You'll find 1/4, 1/2, 5/8, 3/8, whatever. You're going to see if you can find 1/2 inch. And if you can't, like mine says 4/8. Well, 4/8 is 1/2 inch. So whatever mark you have at the 1/2 inch, and some sewing machines don't have marks, so you can take your ruler and try to line up the 1/2 inch with your needle and find your 1/2 inch mark line on your plate. I hope everybody can see what I'm talking about there. Those lines that are etched into the plate of your sewing machine. Okay, so we're going to position our fabric at the 1/2 inch mark. And if you can't find the mark or you're not sure, you can always measure over 1/2 inch from your needle and put a piece of masking tape there to use as your guide for the sewing. So I've got it says 4/8, which is equal to 1/2. Do your fraction conversion. I got my presser foot down. I know where my 2 threads are, top and bottom threads. And I'm going to hold on to those threads for a stitch or two, and then we're going to keep sewing. Okay. Remove your pins as you go. Just let the presser foot pull your fabric through. Don't push it, don't pull it, especially this fabric because it's stretchy. You don't want to be stretching it because it makes your seams all weird, puckery. Okay, that's one side done. We're going to do the other side. Get my threads out of the way there. Find my 4/8 inch mark there to guide my width of my seam. Put my presser foot down, hang on to those threads for a couple stitches, and then keep going. Just keep your edge of your fabric even with the mark on your plate on your sewing machine. Okay, I'm going a little bit fast because I'm used to sewing. If you're not used to using the machine, just go slow. It's better than making mistakes and having to tear things out when you're done. Okay. All right. Here we go. We've got our two sides sewn, and we're ready to turn it right side out and proceed as if we hand sewed. Okay, so now we have basically a tube that we sewed. So we're going to turn it right side out. There's our little theatrical masks there. We're going to try to pull everything out so it's flat. And we're going to press it flat. So this is where the iron comes in. And you will want to make sure you have a grown-up nearby, or even let the grown-up do it if you're nervous, because you can burn yourself on an iron. I am living proof that you survive it, but it's not pleasant. You get a blister and it hurts. So if your grown-up isn't present, go grab them right now. Okay, so I have it out here on my ironing board. If you don't have an ironing board, you can just fold a towel. Just make sure it's on something that isn't going to get damaged by heat. You don't want to put it on your grown-up's best table. So I'm just ironing it, flattening it out. You can flip it over if you want, get the other side, just to make sure those edges are nice and neat and push down. So you notice that my iron is steaming, which means there's water inside turning into steam. And what the steam does is it loosens the fibers in the fabric and kind of warms them up and makes them pliable, bendable, so that when you iron, then it's molding to the shape of your iron, which happens to be flat. So that's what the heat and the moisture kind of relax the fibers in there. And then when they cool off, they assume the new shape, which is flat. Always remember to turn your iron off when you're done with it, and then you don't burn your house down. So now we're going to mark our pleats. So we need our ruler again. So this is now 5 inches. So we're going to measure down. I'm going to say we're going to measure down, or measure up. Let's measure up. Measure up 1/2 inch and mark it. Now we're going to measure 1 inch from that. Mark it. Measure up 1/2 inch. Mark 1 inch. See if we can get 3 in here. 1/2 inch there, and 1 inch. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Measure up 1/2 inch, and then 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1 inch. Oops, that's 3/4. 1 inch, right? There's 1 inch. Okay, so now this will all become clear as mud in a moment. So I'm going to start, if it looks the same either way, then it doesn't matter which end you start with. Since my my design is right here, this is going to be my top. So I'm going to fold right where those 2 marks are. And actually I should probably be doing this at the ironing board because we're going to iron these down. Okay, so we're going to the marks, the first mark at the top, and we're folding it here, and we're going to keep it folded all the way across. And you're going to, oops, you're going to press it close as you can. Okay, now let that sit for a minute so it's not so hot. Then we're going to fold it down, that edge up there. We're going to fold that mark down and match it to the next mark. That was 1 inch ago. Why does this not look like it's working? Let's start. It doesn't look right. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom then. Go to the second mark and we'll work our way up. So pinch those and bring those down to the next mark. So you've got the second mark, you're bringing down to the first mark right there. Okay, we're going to make sure that's flat all the way across and just press it down. Okay, that's going to be a little hot. Let that cool off a little bit. Now we're going to take not this mark, but this mark. We're going to fold it. Again, pinch it at the mark and bring it down to that other mark. Now my mask faces look very strange. Okay, and then we're going to press that down and make that flat. All right, so now we've got this one, the last mark at the top. I'm going to pinch that, fold it down to the mark below it, and we're going to just watch your fingers when you're doing this. Okay. So now it's like a fan fold. Turn your iron off. Okay. It's like a fan fold. So now we're going to take some pins and just pin those down so they stay in place right at the folds. And you're going to be pinning through multiple layers of fabric, so just be careful. This might be a little hard to push through. Okay, did that side. Now we'll do this side. I can't get where my camera is. Okay, it's like working backwards. And my brain doesn't like to work that way. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'll pin down and I'll fold it up. For some reason, this mask is a little bit smaller than the other one, so the measurements aren't going to work that I showed you for the other one. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to sort of eyeball the pleats, just sort of make my own folds here, and you can iron them down after you get them situated. You just want to make sure that you have some room, that your edges are smaller than the middle. So I'm going to pinch this one down a little bit. Just make sure they're even on either side. I started to press this and then decided it wasn't worth it. See if we can get another fold out of here. I can get one more pinched in here. Come on now. Worked on the other side. Okay. Close enough. Okay. Okay, now you're going to get your ties that you cut earlier. We're going to fold it in half, find the middle. We're going to make a mark right there where the center is. Okay, do the same with the other side. Make sure you're doing it on the wrong side if you can figure out which one that is. It's the side where the stitches are folded over. So make another mark there. There's the center. So we're going to find the center here. We have almost 2 inches, so 1 3/4 inches. So a little less than an inch is your center right there. And so a little less than an inch right there. So you're going to take the edge that has the stitching where the mark is, and you're going to line it up with that mark there. We're going to move our pins so that we can pin the edge down. Okay, so we're pinned down like that. We want to make sure all our edges match up both sides. Okay. We're going to do the same thing over here. Find your middle mark, and match them up. Move your pins. So we want to keep those folds folded while we sew. And we need the folds because the side of our face is shorter at the ears than it is in the middle where the nose is. So those folds help us fit this better to our faces. Okay, so now we're going to sew along this edge and sew this down. So our ties to our mask. We're going to make sure our tails of our thread match up. Wrap it around, make our knot. If you don't have a knot, your thread's just going to go right on through. Well, that doesn't. Okay, I'm going to try that again. Roll it, roll it, roll it. Okay. So now I'm going to hide our knot down underneath. And I'm going to put it inside here. So it's really hidden inside here. Underneath before I start sewing the two parts together. I have a little tail there. I'm just going to trim off. That's just going to poke out. Now this is going to be visible because I'm using black thread on white. You would want to try to match the color of your t-shirt with your thread. So, okay, so I have this coming up out of there with my knot hidden inside. So this is the underside, and I'm going to poke up through, and actually maybe the tie side should be the underside. So I'm coming up through. I'm going to do a back stitch. I'm going to come out the other side. We're going to work with this side up so we can keep track of those folds. And if you feel like you want to move your pins up to the side, go ahead. I'm just going to leave it the way it is right now and just try to take them out as I go. So now I'm going to go down, catch that edge, and come back up. And you might, because there's so many layers and it's so thick and it's so hard to manipulate the fabric, you may just want to go all the way down through with your needle and just pull it out the other side and then come back up. Make sure we're doing about 1/4 of an inch from the edge there. We don't want it too wide because it's gonna flip over. I'm gonna take this pin out now because we don't need it there anymore. We just stitched down our fold. I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna go all the way down, pull it out here, and then I'm gonna come up on the other side. Well, this is a little fiddly. And I got my tie stuck in there. Get out of there. Okay. There's a lot to keep track of when you do this. So we're gonna keep doing our back stitch, but instead of bending it and coming up, because there's so many layers, and you might miss some if you bend the fabric, we're just gonna do it a stitch at a time down to the bottom and then come up just before where the thread went down before, where the stitch went down. So we're gonna go down, come all the way through, get that thread out of the way, and come up, and then we're going to come up, catch that fold in the next stitch to make sure it stays down. I'm going to take that pin out. It bothers me. We're going to come down. Maybe you can bend it. I can bend it right there. Just got to make sure you're catching all your layers. I got a loop. Catch all your layers and make sure all your edges are out. Go down, all the way down. Because you are stitching through like maybe 6 or 8 layers by this point. And I'll come up the other side. And as long as you're catching everything, I'm not too worried about how the stitches look at this point. So that's going to be the back side. Go down. Got another fold here. I'm going to come up on this side of the fold. Oh, I got a tangle. For some reason, one side always seems to like to get uneven, and I don't know why that happens. Okay, make sure you're catching the edges of those folds as you're stitching. Keep them stitched down. I'm going to go forward here. I'm going to go back in there, down, and then come back from the bottom, up ahead. Yeah, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 7 or 8 layers of fabric right there right now. Come up ahead. There's the pin. I'm going to take that out. Down in there. Come up. Just remember the side that you come out on is the side you go down on. So if your thread is up here, you're going to go down from this side. A lot of kids forget. They get like this and then they come over and they try to sew over and come up again. But you come up and then you go down on the same side. That's a little uneven, so I'm going to try to fix that up a little bit. Okay. There, that's better. Down. In. Make sure you're getting all the edges. Oh, get out of there. And come up. No, I don't think we can bend it here now at the end. There's not so many layers now. Okay, made it all the way across. It's a little crazy, but we did it. And it's going to be inside, so I won't see all the mess. Now, if you want, you can go back over. I'm going to show you another stitch you can do to keep the edges together. Come up from the bottom. And you're going to make another stitch here, like side by side. But before you pull your loop all the way closed, and there is a loop there, it's uneven, but you're going to, like when you tie off, this is a bad example. Okay. You're going to put your thread through, and this will look better as you go. Okay, so you're going to come up again through all the layers. You're going to pull your thread almost tight, leave a loop, come up from behind, pull it tight. And this is going to make sort of a bound edge along the edge of your seam so that all the edges stay together. So you're going to go next to the one you just did. And I sort of keep the loop over this way so I automatically come up through it. So it's my thread, my needle is already through that loop. So if I wrap it around on top of my hand like that and come up from underneath, go in, come up, and you see that loop, my needle's already coming up through the loop. Or if you want me to show you this way again so it makes more sense, you make the stitch next to that stitch, come up, and then bring your needle through. Either way, this takes a little bit fewer steps. And you can see there's kind of a bound up edge there, so everything kind of stays together. You don't have to do this. I like it because it just makes things a little neater. And all together, I may run out of thread before I get to the end of this, but See, my needle's already in the loop when I do it that way, when I put my thread over like that. Bring the thread back behind my needle. Bring it up through the loop. Just hold it all together. Stitches side by side, parallel if you will. Go. That adds a little extra strength to the seam as well. Okay, so we're almost to the end. We're just going to do one more. Just to wrap it all up here. Okay, there we go. You see, it's all kind of bound together there on the edge. So we're going to make our ending stitch. We're going to do one more through the loop, pull it tight, do one more through the loop, pull it tight, and then bring your one more stitch. Bring it away from the edge so we can sort of hide the tail and clip it off. And there your one side is done. So. And that also, I think, kind of helps it lay flat. And when we're done, we can press that down so that it stays flat so we don't see that part of it. Ow, pin. And I'm just going to sew this other side. So I decided to have the folds up when I sew this so that I can kind of keep track of where they are. So I flip the pins from the other side to this side so they'll be easier to pull out. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam, so you can use the edge of your presser foot as your guide to your seam width. And put your presser foot down. Where's your threads? And we're going to go. As soon as I can find my pedal. Come here, you. Okay. Okay, now this is a little bit thicker. So if you have a machine that's kind of basic, might have a little trouble getting over the folds. You might need to kind of nudge it along a little bit. Even mine is kind of complaining. Okay, now if you want, you can do a zigzag stitch along the edge to kind of keep the raw edges together. I'm just gonna set it on the zigzag and just go back the other way. Keep that right on the edge there, between the stitching and the edge. It helps keep it together a little bit more. I'm just going to clip off my threads here. And I'm going to do the other side. It's the same way. Okay, come here, thread. This is why you keep track of everything. Sometimes it gets out of whack. Alright, we're keeping the presser foot even with the edge of the fabric for our 1/4 inch. Uh-oh, I'm still on. I was still on zigzag. Oh well. Pay attention, Miss Becky, to what you're doing. Just make sure you get those pins out of there as you're going. You do not want to break a needle on one of those things. Okay. I'm going to do my zigzag. Make sure to position it so that your zigzag goes between your straight stitch and your edge. If it gets bunched up in there a little bit, you can just pick up your presser foot, put it back down. Okay. Clip off my threads. Alrighty. Okay, so I've sewn both my sides, and I did the binding, the blanket stitch. It's called a blanket stitch, the binding stitch. So I'm going to flip this over, and we're going to iron down the ties where we've sewn, just to keep them flat so they don't stick out. So I'm just going to run iron over there. Out. Make sure your iron's not too hot, especially if you have a cotton blend or not completely cotton t-shirt. If there's some polyester in there, a too hot iron will melt your fabric. Don't ask me how I know this. Okay, so we've got everything all down. There's our masks on the mask. And I'm going to try this on, see how it fits. So here we go. Okay, so you want it to fit about the middle of your nose. Go around if you want. This is the tricky part. You may need a helper here. You want to put it over your ear. Let's see how the sides fit. See, goes right to the edge of my ear, which is exactly where I want it to go. So if you want to wrap it around your ear, you can make a loop. Oh, got my earring stuck. You know, figure out how much you need and tie it off, or pin it and sew it. I want to put a little overhand knot there just to see if you have the right amount of tension there. This is kind of tricky. Okay, where are my ends? It's like when I'm looking at my camera, it's like looking in a mirror, and you know how sometimes, maybe you don't have this problem, but I do, looking in a mirror, things are backwards and my brain can't make sense of it. So like, all right, you'll figure it out. You can tie it, loop it and tie it. I prefer, instead of going through all that, I just like to tie it in the back, right there. And there's just enough tie for me to do that. It's a square knot, but that's what I need to do. I don't feel like adding more tie to this. So this will work. Okay. There. I've got my mask. And it fits, it's custom fit to my face. Now, when you wear a mask for a long time, I'll give you a few tips, because I have to wear this all day long when I'm at the library. It should fit well enough to be snug over your nose so that your air is actually being filtered out through the mask instead of coming out the gaps. So this is pretty good. I'm not getting the steamy glasses, which sometimes happens with other masks that don't fit tight to my face right there. The steam from my breath comes up and steams my glasses. This is working pretty well. You may think that you can't breathe in a mask, but I'm telling you, doctors and nurses wear masks all day long. And if you at all feel as if you can't catch your breath, or you're having trouble, you can just kind of lift this out a little bit. Take a few deep breaths just till you feel calm again, and go back in. You're not going to suffocate. There's plenty of air getting into your lungs. It's just your mind working against you, thinking that you're in trouble because your mouth is covered. But I sit with this on all day long at work, at the library, and I'm still here. I haven't keeled over, so you are not going to suffocate in a mask. And this is the proper way to wear it. I see a lot of people doing this. And you can still breathe in and out through your nose, which means whatever coronavirus molecules are in the air, you can still breathe them in. And if you're carrying the virus in your body and don't know it yet, you can breathe it out into the air and make other people sick. So this does nothing for you. Put that mask up over your nose. And of course, this does nothing for anyone. This is technically wearing a mask, but not wearing a mask properly. So make sure that it's up over your nose, that it's secure against your face, it's not covering your ears, and there you go. You've got your own mask. And good luck. I hope you stay safe and well. And tell your friends.